The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mark's meticulously maintained backyard, bathing his turquoise pool in a golden, inviting glow. It was his haven, a testament to years of back-breaking work and careful planning. Every tile, every shimmering ripple of water was a direct reflection of his dedication. He'd poured his soul and a significant portion of his life savings into creating this private oasis. For Mark, the pool wasn't just a recreational feature, it was a symbol of his independence, a quiet rebellion against the encroaching uniformity of suburban life, a place where he could finally, truly unwind after brutal shifts at the manufacturing plant. He was just about to shed his work clothes and dive in, the promise of cool water a balm on his tired skin, when the shrill, unmistakable voice cut through the tranquil hum of the cicadas. "Mr. Jensen, a word if you please." Mark flinched, recognizing the voice with a sinking feeling in his gut. Karen Beaumont. The name alone conjured images of perfectly coiffed hair, a perpetually pursed mouth, and an unshakable belief in her own omnipotence. As the president of the Heritage Oaks Homeowners Association, Karen wielded her power like a finely sharpened scalpel, dissecting every perceived infraction, every untamed blade of grass, with surgical precision. She was a woman who saw rules, not as guidelines, but as personal decrees, to be enforced with an almost religious zeal. Mark turned slowly, forcing a polite, if strained, smile. Karen stood at the edge of his property line, her hands clasped primly in front of her, an expression of severe disapproval etched onto her face. Behind her, hovering like a shadow, was Mrs. Henderson, the HOA's long-suffering secretary, clutching a clipboard as if it were a shield against the inevitable storm. "Karen," Mark greeted, his voice carefully neutral. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" He gestured vaguely at the setting sun, implying she was interrupting his precious evening. Karen, however, was impervious to subtle hints. She took a step onto his lawn, a line Mark usually considered sacrosanct. "It's about the pool, Mr. Jensen." Her gaze swept over the sparkling water, not with appreciation, but with an almost predatory glint. Mark's stomach tightened. He'd had his skirmishes with Karen before. The precise shade of his mailbox, the acceptable height of his hedges, even the breed of rose bush he chose to plant. But the pool had always been off-limits. It was indisputably his, built entirely within the confines of his property, permitted and inspected by the city with no HOA involvement whatsoever. "My pool?" Mark asked, a flicker of genuine confusion mixing with his growing irritation. "What about it?" Karen's smile was thin, triumphant. "Well, after a thorough review of the original Heritage Oaks covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs, as you know, by the board, we've come to a rather definitive conclusion." She paused, allowing the dramatic weight of her words to hang in the air, clearly savoring the moment. Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably behind her, her eyes darting between Karen and Mark. "And what conclusion would that be, Karen?" Mark asked, his patience wearing thin. He could feel the last vestiges of his earlier calm evaporating, replaced by a simmering anger. "Simply this, Mr. Jensen," Karen declared, puffing out her chest slightly. "Your pool, while constructed within your property lines, occupies a parcel of land that was, according to the original, somewhat ambiguously worded plat maps, designated as a community leisure amenity corridor. Due to this oversight, in earlier interpretations, the board has formally declared that the pool structure and the immediate surrounding patio now fall under the jurisdiction of the Homeowners Association as a shared common area." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. He stared at her, his mouth agape. "Are you out of your mind? My pool is not a common area. I paid for this. I built this. It's on my deeded property." His voice rose, a raw edge of disbelief and fury creeping in. Karen remained unmoved, her expression one of serene, unassailable authority. The CC&Rs, Mr. Jensen, are quite clear once reevaluated, and frankly, the fact that such a substantial amenity has been monopolized by a single homeowner for so long is, in itself, an egregious oversight that needed rectifying. The community, Mr. Jensen, will now have access. Access? Mark sputtered, clenching his fists. You mean you and your cronies want to use my pool? This is trespassing, this is theft. He felt a dizzying surge of adrenaline, his mind racing to comprehend the sheer audacity of her claim. The thought of strangers, of Karen herself, lounging by his water, splashing in his chlorine, made his blood boil. Language, Mr. Jensen, Karen chided, a subtle lift of her chin indicating her disdain for his outburst. The board will be drawing up a schedule for community use naturally. There will be designated hours, and we'll implement a sign-up system to ensure fair access for all residents. She looked around his backyard, her eyes already envisioning the changes she would impose. Perhaps a new fence line will be required to separate the community leisure amenity from your private dwelling. We'll need to discuss maintenance contributions, of course. Mark took a step forward, his eyes blazing. You're not putting a single toe in this pool. You're not drawing up anything. This is my property, and I will defend it. He pointed a shaking finger at her. You have no right, absolutely no right, to claim ownership of something I bought and paid for. Karen sighed, a long put-upon sound that implied his resistance was merely a childish tantrum. Mr. Jensen, the HOA has legal counsel. We have consulted them. Our interpretation of the CC&Rs is legally binding. Should you resist, the association will be forced to levy significant fines and, if necessary, pursue legal action to ensure compliance. You could lose your property, Mr. Jensen. Is a swimming pool truly worth losing your home? The threat hung in the air, heavy and chilling. Mark felt the anger morph into a cold dread. Losing his home? All because of this power-hungry woman and some obscure, twisted interpretation of ancient documents? His sanctuary, his hard-won peace, was being threatened by a petty tyrant. He looked at his pool, no longer a symbol of calm, but a battleground. Karen gave him another thin smile, a victor surveying her prize. I suggest you think carefully, Mr. Jensen. The board meets next Tuesday to finalize the details. We expect your cooperation. With a crisp nod to Mrs. Henderson, who quickly averted her gaze, Karen turned and walked away, her footsteps precise and unyielding. The silence in Mark's living room was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an old grandfather clock, a gift from his late father that usually brought comfort, but now felt like a countdown to his own impending doom. The legal papers lay spread across his coffee table, stark white declarations of war against the backdrop of his cozy lived-in space. He'd spent the entire evening, after Karen's venomous pronouncements, poring over the HOA's CC&Rs, cross-referencing them with his property deed, city zoning regulations, and every dusty document he could find pertaining to his home. Each clause felt like a snare, each paragraph a twist of the knife. Karen wasn't bluffing. The language was indeed ambiguous, a labyrinth of legal jargon designed to protect the association's interests, even at the expense of its individual members. The term Community Leisure Amenity Corridor was buried deep within an addendum. From 1987, a relic of a time before Heritage Oaks even had half its current homes, let alone a man like Mark Jensen who'd dare to install his own pool. He rubbed his temples, a dull ache throbbing behind his eyes. The thought of fighting a legal battle against the HOA, with their bottomless coffers and a lawyer likely on retainer, was daunting. He pictured the mountain of bills, the endless court dates, the stress that would undoubtedly consume his life. His factory job provided a decent living, but it was hardly enough to fund a protracted legal war against a well-funded association. Surrender, however, felt like a betrayal of everything he believed in, a capitulation to a bully who thrived. on intimidation. Karen had threatened his home. She had threatened his sanctuary. And Mark Jensen, though a man of quiet routine, had a stubborn streak wider than any suburban street. That dark, defiant thought from the previous evening began to coalesce, sharpen into something tangible. If it's theirs to dictate, it's his to profit from. The concept was audacious, perhaps even a little mad, but it was also deliciously symmetrical. If they claimed ownership, they also, by extension, assumed responsibility. And if they assumed responsibility, then surely they couldn't object to him managing this newly shared common area. He reached for his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a newfound energy. He started with research, private pools, public access, liability, licensing. The internet was a treasure trove of information, revealing a surprising number of individuals who had, in various forms, commercialized their private swimming pools. There were apps, booking platforms, and even legal precedents for such ventures, albeit usually on larger, more rural properties. His plan would need refinement, adaptation to the specific restrictive environment of Heritage Oaks. The next morning, fortified by a potent dose of caffeine and an even more potent dose of resolve, Mark set his plan into motion. He didn't wait for Karen's board meeting. He acted. First, he spent a full day on the phone, navigating the bureaucratic maze of City Hall. He inquired about business licenses, short-term rental permits for amenities, and commercial liability insurance policies. The city clerk, a perpetually bored woman named Brenda, initially scoffed at the idea of a backyard resort, but Mark's calm, insistent tone eventually wore her down. He was meticulous, asking precise questions, taking copious notes, and uncovering loopholes and regulations he never knew existed. It turned out, with the right permits and insurance, running a small, private, pay-per-swim operation was not entirely out of the question, albeit unconventional for a residential zone. The key, Brenda emphasized, was operating within strict noise ordinances, parking regulations, and maintaining a clear distinction between personal and commercial use during operating hours. His next call was to his insurance agent, a mild-mannered man named Phil who nearly choked on his coffee when Mark explained his audacious proposal. A commercial pool, Mr. Jensen? In your backyard? Phil stammered, clearly struggling to reconcile the Mark he knew with this new, entrepreneurial version. But Mark calmly laid out his legal predicament with the HOA, framing his plan not as an act of defiance, but as a practical, albeit extreme, solution to a property dispute. Phil, a professional if nothing else, eventually promised to research a suitable umbrella policy. It wouldn't be cheap, Mark knew, but neither was losing his home. The transformation of Mark's backyard began subtly. A discreet, professional-looking sign appeared near his gate, not screaming "resort," but simply stating, "Heritage Oasis, private pool access, reservations required." Below it, in smaller, elegant script, were details for an online booking platform he'd swiftly built using a user-friendly website builder. He outlined clear rules: no diving, no excessive noise, specific hours of operation, and a strict capacity limit. He even integrated a digital payment system. He invested in high-quality, comfortable lounge chairs, fresh towels, and a small, solar-powered mini-fridge stocked with bottled water and prepackaged snacks, all offered at a modest additional charge. He meticulously cleaned the pool, double-checked the chemical balance, and installed a discreet security camera system, ostensibly for guest safety. He knew the true test would come with the HOA board meeting. He decided to attend, not to argue or plead, but to observe, and to deliver his own particular brand of karmic shock. Tuesday evening arrived, heavy with humidity and an unspoken tension. The community center's meeting room was packed, residents buzzing with whispers, all eyes on Karen Beaumont, who sat at the head of a long table, flanked by Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Davies, the treasurer. Mark took a seat in the back, a calm, almost serene expression on his face, which unnerved Karen more than any angry outburst would have. Karen called the meeting to order, her voice resonating with her usual self-importance. She droned through the usual agenda: landscaping budgets, new dog park proposals, and then finally the Jensen pool situation. As I informed Mr. Jensen personally last week, Karen began, her gaze sweeping pointedly over Mark, who offered a small, polite nod. The board has unanimously voted to reclassify the pool at 147 Whisperwind Lane as a community leisure amenity. This decision is based on a meticulous review of the original CCNRs and is legally sound. She puffed out her chest. We regret that this may cause some inconvenience to Mr. Jensen, but the needs of the many, as they say, outweigh the needs of the one. A murmur went through the room. Some residents looked sympathetic toward Mark, others nodded in agreement, with Karen, tired of the perpetual drama she stirred. Therefore, Karen continued, a triumphant gleam in her eyes, the board has drafted a new addendum outlining community access. Starting next week, residents will be able to sign up for 2-hour slots between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., Monday through Friday, and 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. on weekends. There will be a small administrative fee of $5 per family per slot to cover processing and liability insurance costs for the HOA. She then launched into a detailed explanation of the sign-up system, oblivious to the subtle shift in Mark's posture. When Karen finally finished, opening the floor for questions, Mark slowly rose from his seat in the back. His voice was calm, clear, and projected through the room without needing to shout. "Excuse me, Karen," Mark said, his tone devoid of anger, almost deferential. "I just have a small clarification." Karen, clearly expecting an argument, narrowed her eyes. "Yes, Mr. Jensen. You stated that the board has formally declared my pool and its immediate surrounding patio as a community leisure amenity corridor, correct? And that it now falls under the jurisdiction of the Homeowners Association as a shared common area?" Karen nodded, a smug look on her face. "That is correct, Mr. Jensen. Unanimously. And you also stated that the HOA will be implementing a schedule for community use with designated hours, a sign-up system, and an administrative fee of $5 per family per slot?" "Yes, Mr. Jensen, to cover our costs," Karen replied, her impatience growing. "What is your point?" Mark smiled, a slow, predatory grin that sent a shiver down Mrs. Henderson's spine. "My point, Karen, is simply this. As the rightful owner of the property on which this community leisure amenity corridor resides, and as a proactive member of this community, I have taken the liberty of streamlining this new arrangement. Effective immediately, I have secured all necessary business licenses, commercial liability insurance, and established a fully operational pay-per-swim resort right in my backyard. It's called Heritage Oasis. The current rate, Karen, is a modest $25 per person per hour with discounted rates for full-day passes. Children under 5 swim free, of course. All bookings must be made through my website, and I accept all major credit cards." A stunned silence fell over the room. Jaws dropped, eyes widened. Karen's perfectly coiffed hair seemed to stiffen, her face blanching to a ghostly white as the full implication of Mark's words registered. Mrs. Henderson's clipboard slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly on the linoleum floor. Mark, still smiling, concluded, "And naturally, since the HOA has declared it a community leisure amenity, I assume you'll be the first in line to pay the commercial rate, Karen. After all, the community will have access, won't they?" The stunned silence in the community center meeting room stretched, taut and agonizing, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning and a single nervous cough from the back row. Karen Beaumont, her face now a kaleidoscope of disbelief, outrage, and dawning horror, looked as though she'd been struck by lightning. Her meticulously composed facade cracked, revealing the raw, sputtering fury beneath. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, darted around the room, desperately seeking allies, but found only a sea of wide-eyed residents, some openly gaping, others struggling to suppress snickers. Mrs. Henderson, who had retrieved her clipboard, was now using it to fan herself weakly, her face flushed. Mr. Davies, the treasurer, just stared at Mark, a peculiar mix of shock and reluctant admiration on his face. This is preposterous!" Karen finally shrieked, her voice several octaves higher than usual. She slammed her hand on the table, making the water pitcher jump. "You cannot do this, Mr. Jensen. This is a residential community. You cannot run a commercial enterprise from your home." Mark remained standing, his stance relaxed, a slight knowing smile playing on his lips. "Ah, but Karen, you just said it yourself, didn't you? The HOA, under your astute leadership, has formally declared my pool a community leisure amenity, corridor, and a shared common area. If it's a community amenity, then it's no longer solely a private residential feature, is it? And if it's a shared common area under HOA jurisdiction, then surely the HOA, by extension, would be thrilled to see it utilized to its fullest potential, bringing a unique service to the neighborhood. I'm simply operating under the new terms. You yourself established." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "With all due respect, Karen, you can't have it both ways." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the room. Mark's logic, however infuriating, was undeniable. Karen had painted herself into a corner with her own pronouncements. She had, in her zeal to assert control, inadvertently provided Mark with the very legal leverage he needed. "This is a blatant attempt to circumvent HOA regulations," Karen thundered, rising from her chair, her face now a mottled red. "A malicious act of defiance. We will not stand for it. The board will issue a cease and desist order immediately. We'll fine you into oblivion." Mark chuckled softly, a sound that grated on Karen's nerves. "Cease and desist what exactly, Karen? Operating a legally licensed, commercially insured business on what you have declared to be community property. I'm merely providing the community access you so vehemently insisted upon. And as for fines, I've already factored in a Karen tax into my pricing structure. Consider it a premium for pioneering a revolutionary new concept in suburban leisure." He pulled out his phone, tapping a few times. "In fact, for those who are curious, Heritage Oasis is now live for bookings. The first 3 slots tomorrow. Morning are already taken, I'm pleased to report. Mrs. Peterson from down the street was very keen on securing a private swim for her grandchildren before school." He looked directly at Mrs. Peterson, who blushed but gave him a small conspiratorial nod. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Karen's eyes widened further, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She realized with a sickening lurch that Mark had not only turned her power play against her, but had also publicly humiliated her in front of the very community she sought to dominate. "This is war, Mr. Jensen," she hissed, her voice low and menacing, finally dropping, all pretense of civility. "No, Karen," Mark said, his smile unwavering. "This is capitalism, and you just inadvertently provided me with an excellent business model. Thank you for the inspiration." He bowed slightly, a theatrical flourish that drew more open laughter from the residents. With that, he turned and calmly walked out of the meeting, leaving Karen sputtering, the entire room erupting into a cacophony of excited chatter. The next morning, the Heritage Oasis sign near Mark's gate was no longer discreet. It was adorned with a banner, handwritten in bold, cheerful letters. "Now open! Your HOA-approved community amenity." A line of curious residents, clutching towels and wearing swimsuits under their clothes, formed outside his gate. They were mostly families with children, eager to try out the new, unconventional resort. The first few guests, a young couple with 2 giggling toddlers, approached the gate cautiously, uncertain what to expect. Mark, now in swim trunks and a vibrant Hawaiian shirt, greeted them with a professional yet friendly demeanor. He efficiently checked their booking on his tablet, processed their payment, and handed them freshly laundered towels. "Welcome to Heritage Oasis. Please observe the rules posted by the pool. Enjoy your swim." The moment the family stepped through the gate, their initial hesitancy melted away. The children shrieked with delight at the sight of the shimmering blue water. Their parents, after a moment of awe at the pristine condition of the pool and the comfortable lounge chairs, settled in. The sound of happy splashing and children's laughter soon filled Mark's backyard. Across the street, perched at her living room window, Karen Beaumont watched through her binoculars, her face a mask of incandescent fury. She saw the children playing, heard their joyous sounds, and watched as Mark, with an infuriatingly relaxed air, offered the couple a chilled bottle of water. This wasn't just defiance. It was an open, public triumph. Her humiliation was complete. Suddenly, a sleek black SUV pulled up to Mark's curb. A man in a sharp suit and sunglasses stepped out, followed by a woman carrying a professional camera. They were clearly not residents. Mark, ever the meticulous planner, had anticipated this. He had, the night before, sent an anonymous tip to the local news station about a unique property dispute in Heritage Oaks, promising an unusual story of community access. The stage was set. Karen watched, her fury turning to a cold, calculating dread, as the reporters approached Mark's gate, microphones in hand. This was no longer just a neighborhood squabble. This was about to go public. And Mark, with his relaxed. The arrival of the news van, a gleaming black SUV emblazoned with the logo of Channel 7 Eyewitness News, was like a siren call that shattered the quiet morning peace of Heritage Oaks. It was a ripple that quickly became a wave, drawing curious neighbors out from their homes, their heads swiveling between the reporters at Mark's gate and Karen's now furious figure framed in her window across the street. The once discreet Heritage Oasis banner fluttered triumphantly in the gentle breeze, now magnified under the harsh glare of media attention. Mark, ever the pragmatist, had anticipated the spectacle. He calmly excused himself from his first paying guests, the young couple with their gleeful toddlers who were now splashing happily in the pool, and approached his gate. The reporter, a sharp-featured woman with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and an earnest expression, extended a microphone. Beside her, the cameraman adjusted his lens, capturing not just Mark, but the vibrant pool, the laughing children, and, subtly, the anxious faces of the neighbors gathering. "Mr. Jensen," the reporter began, her voice smooth and professional. "Laura Davies, Channel 7 News. We received a tip about a rather unconventional situation here in Heritage Oaks. Can you tell us about your Heritage Oasis?" Mark, despite the internal flutter of nerves, maintained his composed smile. He spoke clearly, concisely, and with a carefully rehearsed calm. He didn't rant or rave. He simply presented the facts, twisting Karen's own words into a narrative of community service. "Well, Ms. Davies, it's quite simple, really. Our esteemed HOA recently decided that my private swimming pool, which I built and maintain on my own property, is actually a community leisure amenity corridor and a shared common area. As a law-abiding resident and a believer in community spirit, I simply decided to facilitate this newly declared community access." He gestured towards the splashing children. "I went through all the proper channels, obtained a business license, secured commercial liability insurance, not an easy feat for a backyard pool, mind you, and now I'm offering a valuable service, a safe, clean, and enjoyable swimming experience for my neighbors, all within the framework of the HOA's own declaration. It's a win-win, really." The reporter's eyebrows arched, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "So, the HOA declared your pool public, and your response was to turn it into a pay-per-swim resort?" "Exactly," Mark affirmed, a subtle glint in his eye. "If it's a community amenity, it should be treated as such. And operating it efficiently, safely, and in a way that covers the significant costs of upkeep, insurance, and the permits required for such a community amenity, well, that just made good business sense. He pointed to his banner. It's even HOA approved if you go by their latest ruling. Across the street, Karen watched the interview unfold, her knuckles white as she gripped the windowsill. Each calm, articulate word from Mark was a fresh stab. The reporter's knowing glances, the camera lingering on the HOA-approved banner. Yeah, it was all designed to mock her, to undermine her authority. She could practically hear the collective snickering of the neighborhood. She could already picture the evening news segment, her reputation as the unyielding HOA president crumbling before a smiling man in a Hawaiian shirt. She snatched up her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Mr. Goldstein, the HOA's legal counsel. "Goldstein, you need to turn on Channel 7. Right now. This is an absolute disaster. Jensen is making a mockery of us." Meanwhile, the reporter turned her attention to the family emerging from the pool, dripping and happy. "So how was your experience at Heritage Oasis?" she asked the young mother. The woman beamed. "Oh, it was wonderful. The kids had a blast. It's so hard to find a good, clean pool that isn't overcrowded. And Mr. Jensen is so welcoming. Honestly, it's a brilliant idea. A little expensive, maybe, but worth it for the peace and quiet. $25 an hour per person is what Mr. Jensen is charging," the reporter clarified for the camera. "Is that something you're comfortable with, especially considering the HOA's initial plan for a $5 family fee?" The father shrugged good-naturedly. "Hey, Karen and the HOA said it's a community amenity. Mark's just running it as a business like any other amenity. You pay for golf, you pay for tennis, why not pay for a pristine pool experience? Frankly, I'd rather give my money to Mark than the HOA given their track record." This last comment, delivered with a wry smile directly into the camera, was the final nail in Karen's coffin. Her face, visible through her window, crumpled in defeat. She slammed the phone down, her call to Mr. Goldstein abruptly cut short. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that the tide had turned. Mark had not just defied her. He had expertly leveraged her own bureaucratic tyranny against her, transforming his personal property dispute into a public relations nightmare for the entire Heritage Oaks HOA. As the news crew packed up, promising to feature Heritage Oasis prominently in their evening broadcast, Mark looked across the street. Karen was no longer at her window. He simply smiled, a genuine, satisfied smile. He had turned her weapon against her, not with anger, but with an unexpected twist of the rules. The game had changed, and he was already winning. The true irony, he realized, was that he was now making more money from his community amenity than he ever would have spent fighting the HOA in court. He opened his booking app. Another 3 slots had just been filled. The Channel 7 evening news segment titled "Backyard Battle, HOA Declares Pool Public, Owner Turns It Into Private Resort" aired with a flourish, cementing Mark's narrative as a David versus Goliath tale. The reporter, Laura Davies, delivered her piece with a twinkle in her eye, juxtaposing Karen Beaumont's rigid, legalistic pronouncements with Mark Jensen's calm, entrepreneurial pivot. The image of Karen's furious face at her window, accidentally caught by the cameraman, became an instant meme among local online communities. Public opinion, both within Heritage Oaks and across the wider city, overwhelmingly sided with Mark. His booking app, already seeing steady traffic, exploded. Karen, meanwhile, was experiencing a meltdown of epic proportions. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the news aired, but it wasn't residents calling to complain about Mark. It was calls from other HOA presidents, reporters seeking follow-up interviews, and even a few irate homeowners demanding why their HOA couldn't be as innovative as Heritage Oaks. The most chilling call, however, came from Mr. Goldstein, the HOA's legal counsel. Karen, Goldstein's voice was strained, devoid of his usual dry professional calm. "We have a serious problem," The optics on this are devastating. And legally? Jensen has meticulously covered his bases. He's operating within the parameters you set. He's licensed, insured, and following city ordinances. Any cease and desist would be a public relations disaster and likely wouldn't hold up in court without a significant and expensive fight. But the CCNRs, Karen sputtered, pacing her pristine living room like a caged tiger. The Community Leisure Amenity Corridor Clause. That's our leverage. It was your interpretation of that clause, Karen, Goldstein corrected, his tone sharpening. An interpretation that frankly was always a stretch, and now he's taken that stretch and turned it into a fully compliant business. He's profiting from something you legally declared to be communal. The court would likely see this as an HOA overreach, plain and simple, especially with the public sentiment stirred up by the news. So, what are you saying? Karen demanded, her voice rising in panic. That we just let him? Let him turn this community into a circus? Let him make money off our property? Goldstein sighed. I'm saying the best course of action right now is damage control. The board needs to convene urgently. You need to retract the Community Amenity Declaration, and quickly. Try to save face. Otherwise, this could open the HOA up to lawsuits from other residents who feel their property rights have been infringed upon, or even a class action suit from those who want access to his pool without paying, citing your initial declaration. Karen felt a cold dread spread through her. Retract? Admit defeat? In front of everyone? The thought was anathema to her very being. But Goldstein's words about lawsuits and further humiliation resonated. She knew he was right. She could almost taste the bitter pill of public capitulation. The emergency HOA meeting was called for Friday night, an atmosphere of palpable tension filling the community center. Residents attended in droves, not out of obligation, but out of a morbid curiosity, eager to witness the fallout. Mark sat in his usual spot in the back, observing, a quiet confidence radiating from him. He had already cleared over $1,000 in bookings this week. Karen, appearing haggard and unusually subdued, cleared her throat, her voice lacking its usual authoritative ring. Good evening, everyone. We've called this emergency meeting to address the ongoing situation regarding Mr. Jensen's pool. She then launched into a carefully worded, heavily lawyer-vetted statement, trying desperately to spin the retraction. She spoke of revisiting ambiguous clauses, maintaining harmony within the community, and the unforeseen complexities of modern property use. She avoided eye contact with Mark, or indeed, with most of the room. Finally, she uttered the words that tasted like ash in her mouth. Therefore, the board has decided to rescind the declaration of Mr. Jensen's pool as a community leisure amenity corridor. It is and always has been Mr. Jensen's private property. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a wave of triumphant murmurs directed at Mark. Karen's face was beet red, but she pressed on, reading from her prepared statement. We will be sending a formal letter to Mr. Jensen confirming this retraction, and we deeply regret any inconvenience or misunderstanding this may have caused. Mark, however, was not finished. As soon as Karen opened the floor for questions, he rose. His voice, calm and clear, cut through the buzzing room. Karen, I appreciate the board's swift action in clarifying the ownership of my property. However, I must ask, if my pool is now definitively my private property, does that mean the HOA will reimburse me for the expenses I incurred in establishing Heritage Oasis as a community leisure amenity? Karen froze. Reimburse you? She stammered, caught completely off guard. For what? For the business license, the commercial liability insurance, the website development, the new signage, all the costs associated with making a private pool accessible as a community amenity, as you initially demanded, Mark explained, his tone reasonable, almost helpful. I acted in good faith on the HOA's directive. Those are significant operational costs that I undertook. under the impression that I was providing a service the HOA deemed necessary for the community. Now that you've retracted that directive, it seems only fair that the HOA cover those expenses as they were incurred directly due to your board's decision." He calculated quickly in his head. "I'd estimate the total at around $3,000, not including my time, of course," the room erupted. Residents gasped, some openly laughing, others shaking their heads in a mix of disbelief and admiration. Karen's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and utter defeat. Mark had outmaneuvered her again, not just reclaiming his property, but presenting the HOA with a bill for her own hubris. The irony was a bitter, public, and incredibly expensive pill for Karen Beaumont to swallow. The silence that followed Mark's demand for reimbursement was thicker than any Karen had ever experienced, a suffocating blanket woven from disbelief and financial dread. Her face, already flushed in K-rig humiliation of her retraction, deepened to a shade of angry purple. "Reimburse you?" she finally spluttered, the words tasting like poison on her tongue. "For your little gimmick? Absolutely not. The HOA is not responsible for your frivolous business ventures." Mark met her fury with a placid stare. "Frivolous? Karen, you declared my pool a community leisure amenity. You mandated community access. I simply facilitated that access in a legally assidance-sound, commercially viable manner. Every single expense, the business license, the commercial insurance premium, the payment processing fees, the website development, the HOA-approved banner you seemed so fond of, was a direct consequence of your board's unilateral decision. Now that you've rescinded that decision, effectively admitting your error, those expenses are no longer justifiable on my part for a community amenity. They are costs incurred under false pretenses created by the HOA. Mr. Goldstein can confirm this, I'm sure." All eyes, including Karen's, swiveled to Mr. Goldstein, the HOA's lawyer, who sat stiffly beside her. Goldstein, looking profoundly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "While I cannot comment on specific liabilities without further review, Mr. Jensen's argument does hold merit. Acting on an official directive, even one subsequently retracted, can create a reasonable expectation of indemnification for directly related proven expenses." His words were a professional death knell for Karen's argument. A low murmur rippled through the room. Residents who had initially found Mark's entrepreneurship amusing now saw the stark financial implications for the HOA, and by extension, for their own pockets through increased dues. Mr. Davies, the treasurer, shifted nervously. $3,000, you said, Mr. Jensen?" he asked, his voice tight. "That's a significant unbudgeted expenditure for the association." "Indeed," Mark agreed, nodding. "And it's a direct consequence of a decision that, as Mr. Goldstein implies, was likely an overreach en vini first place." He had them cornered, and he knew it. The choice for the board was clear: pay him or face further public scorn and a potentially more damaging legal battle over the reimbursement. Karen's pride warred with cold, hard reality. She envisioned the headlines, the gossip, the utter annihilation of her authority if this went to court. With a guttural growl of pure frustration, she finally, reluctantly, conceded. "Very well, Jensen," she hissed, her voice barely audible. "The board will review your submitted expenses, provide an itemized list." Law small suits and F sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. Justice of a sort was being served. Mark simply nodded, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "I'll have that for you first thing Monday morning." The meeting concluded with an air of profound awkwardness, Karen making a hasty exit, avoiding all eye contact. Mark, however, was besieged by residents, many of whom clapped him on the back, offering congratulations and even asking for discounts on future pool sessions. In the days that followed, Heritage Oasis flourished. The initial curiosity had blossomed into genuine demand. Neighbors, liberated from Karen's iron fist, found themselves enjoying the novel experience of a pristine, crowd-controlled pool just steps away. Mark's booking slots were consistently full, and he found a surprising joie diez role of resort proprietor. He learned the names of the regulars, the kids who always asks of an extra floaty, and mod elderly couple who preferred the quiet morning swims. He even started offering a neighborhood loyalty discount, not enough to undercut his pricing, but enough to foster goodwill and keep the local money flowing. Karen, however, was far from defeated. The reimbursement check, issued begrudgingly by the HOA after Mark presented a meticulously detailed invoice, felt like a public flogging. She stewed in her anger, watching from behind her drawn blinds as the sounds of laughter and splashing emanated from Mark's backyard. She saw the community embracing his resort, and it fueled a renewed, darker obsession. One sweltering afternoon, as Mark sat wiping down lounge chairs, new car, an unfamiliar electric sedan, pulled up to the curb a few houses down from his. A couple, impeccably dressed and radiating an air of quiet sophistication, emerged. They weren't stopping at Mark's pool. Instead, they walked directly to Karen's door. Mark watched, a prickle of unease forming on his skin as Karen, surprisingly, greeted them with a wide, almost theatrical smile. She led them into her house, her posture oozing a renewed sense of purpose. He saw her glance back at his thriving pool, her smile twisting into something cold and knowing. The game, he realized, HOA not over. Karen had found new allies, and he had the feeling they wouldn't be as easily outmaneuvered as the HOA board, mired, caught completely off guard. For what? For the business license, the commercial liability insurance, the website development, the new signage, all the costs associated with making a private pool accessible as a community amenity, as you initially demanded, Mark explained, his tone reasonable, almost helpful. I acted in good faith on the HOA's directive. Those are significant operational costs that I undertook under the impression that I was providing a service the HOA deemed necessary for the community. Now that you've retracted that directive, it seems only fair that the HOA cover those expenses, as they were incurred directly due to your board's decision. He calculated quickly in his head. I'd estimate the total at around $3,000, not including my time, of course. The room erupted. Residents gasped, some openly laughing, others shaking their heads in a mix of disbelief and admiration. Karen's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and utter defeat. Mark had outmaneuvered her again, not just reclaiming his property, but presenting the HOA with a bill for her own hubris. The irony was a bitter, public, and incredibly expensive pill for Karen Beaumont to swallow. The sleek, unfamiliar electric sedan glided silently into Karen Beaumont's driveway, its tinted windows obscuring the faces within. Mark watched from his patio, the faint scent of chlorine mixing with the lingering unease that had settled in. His gut. The couple that emerged was a study in calculated power. The man, tall and immaculately tailored, with an unsettlingly smooth demeanor. The woman, sharp-eyed and poised, her expensive handbag clutched with an air of understated authority. They moved with a purpose that spoke of boardrooms and intricate deals, not casual neighborly visits. Karen, a forced, brittle smile plastered on her face, ushered them inside, but not before casting a venomous glare at Mark's bustling heritage oasis. The message was clear. This was a new front in their war. Mark knew instinctually that these weren't ordinary residents. He'd seen enough corporate machinations in his own career to recognize the scent of professional trouble. He spent the next few days in a heightened state of vigilance, watching for any sign of Karen's next move. The silence from her end was more unnerving than her usual histrionics. It was the calm before a storm, he figured, and storms from Karen were always Category 5. His fears were confirmed a week later when a formal letter arrived, not from the HOA, but from a new entity, Harmony Gardens Development LLC. The letter was meticulously worded, citing a recently discovered century-old easement pertaining to water rights and access for future community agricultural development that supposedly ran directly beneath Mark's property. It alleged that his pool, as a permanent structure, was in violation of this easement and that Harmony Gardens Development, as the purported holders of said easement, intended to initiate immediate legal proceedings to enforce their rights, which could include the demolition of any infringing structures. Mark stared at the letter, his blood running cold. An easement? From a century ago? This was a whole new level of legal sophistry, far beyond Karen's amateurish attempts. He immediately called Mr. Goldstein, the HOA's lawyer, expecting sympathy or at least an explanation. Instead, Goldstein sounded distant, almost evasive. "Mr. Jensen," Goldstein said, his voice clipped, "I'm no longer authorized to discuss this matter with you. Harmony Gardens Development is a new client of my firm." The betrayal stung. Karen hadn't just found new allies. She'd weaponized a powerful legal entity against him, even turning his own HOA's lawyer. He felt a profound sense of isolation. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about his entire property. He spent the next few days in a desperate scramble, contacting his own lawyer, a young but sharp attorney named Sarah Jenkins, who specialized in property law. Sarah, after reviewing the Harmony Gardens letter, looked grim. "This is sophisticated, Mark. This isn't just about HOA rules. They're trying to use an ancient, obscure land right to claim your property. Harmony Gardens Development. I've heard rumors. They're known for aggressive tactics, buying up old easements, then developing the land. This feels like a direct attack, probably orchestrated by someone with a very personal vendetta." Her eyes held his. "Karen, wouldn't you say?" Mark nodded, a heavy weight settling in his stomach. "Definitely, Karen. She wants to see me lose everything." The legal battle that ensued was brutal. Harmony Gardens Development filed a formal lawsuit seeking an injunction against Mark's operation of Heritage Oasis and demanding the immediate removal of his pool. They claimed the pool impeded their right of access to the alleged easement, even though no actual agricultural development had been initiated or even planned. Their legal team was relentless, filing motions, demanding discovery, and painting Mark as a defiant homeowner obstructing legitimate community development. Mark's legal bills began to mount, eclipsing the paltry reimbursement he'd received from the HOA. His savings dwindled. The joy he found in Heritage Oasis was slowly overshadowed by the stress of the impending court dates and the very real threat of losing his pool and potentially his home entirely. His regulars noticed his subdued demeanor, the anxious glances he cast at every unfamiliar car. The laughter in his backyard, though still present, felt fainter, more fragile. Karen, meanwhile, had undergone a remarkable transformation. She seemed to radiate a renewed sense of purpose, her head held high, a knowing smirk often playing on her lips whenever she saw Mark. She made a point of ostentatiously entertaining the Harmony Gardens Development couple at her home. Their presence, a constant, silent reminder to Mark of the powerful forces arrayed against him. The climax came in a stifling courtroom, filled with dry legal air and the drone of arguments. Sarah, Mark's lawyer, fought valiantly, arguing that the easement was defunct, that its original intent was obsolete, and that Harmony Gardens Development had no genuine intention of agricultural use, but rather sought to exploit an arcane clause for personal gain, likely instigated by a disgruntled HOA member. The judge, a stern, elderly woman with a reputation for impartiality, listened patiently. Finally, after hours of testimony and legal sparring, she rendered her decision. "While the original easement is indeed antiquated," the judge stated, her voice cutting through the tension in the room, "it is, regrettably, still legally binding." Harmony Gardens Development LLC does on paper hold a valid right of access. However, she paused, her gaze sweeping over the courtroom, lingering briefly on Karen. The court finds no evidence of any bona fide agricultural development plans by the plaintiff. Furthermore, the court notes the unusual timing of this lawsuit, immediately following a public dispute between Mr. Jensen and the Heritage Oaks HOA. A collective gasp from the gallery. Karen's triumphant expression faltered. Therefore, the judge continued, while Mr. Jensen's pool does technically infringe upon the easement, the court will not grant an injunction for its immediate demolition. Instead, the court orders Harmony Gardens Development LLC to clearly define and demonstrate its actual intent for this easement. If, within 1 year, Harmony Gardens Development LLC fails to commence substantial, demonstrable agricultural development directly impacted by Mr. Jensen's pool, then the easement, as it pertains to Mr. Jensen's property, will be permanently rendered null and void. Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was tinged with a new, dangerous uncertainty. 1 year. 1 year of living under the shadow of potential demolition. He had won a reprieve, but the war was far from over. Karen, pale with shock, stared at the judge, her grand plan derailed, but not entirely defeated. The sophisticated couple from Harmony Gardens Development exchanged tense whispers, their smooth facades cracking under the unexpected setback. The judge's ruling was a temporary victory for Mark, a karmic shock for Karen, but it left a new, ticking clock hanging over Heritage Oasis.